On the heels of the worst economic downturn in recent history that occurred last year owing to the pandemic and oil price shock, the Nigerian economy is seen emerging back to growth in 2021. Yes, according to the latest report from the National Bureau of Statistics, which shows that Nigeria's economy has signaled a gradual recovery from recession as gross domestic product grew by 0.11% in the fourth quarter of 2020. Members of the organized private sector, including the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, said the output contraction recorded in year 2020 further highlighted the country's weak macroeconomic fundamentals and the persistent structural policy and regulatory issues in the economy. Apart from the decline in growth, the country's external reserves experienced a downward trend in the month of February, declining by $565 million due to lower foreign exchange receipts and sustained interventions by the central bank to stabilize the exchange rates. To discuss more on this and, of course, other issues surrounding the Nigerian economy and, of course, globally, I have joining me now via Skype from London. He's a partner and chief economist of White Price Waterhouse-Coopers, PwC, Dr. Andrew Nevin. Dr. Andrew Nevin, thank you very much for your time.
Tolo, it's always a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Yes, it's good to see you, but we were to talk about something else, but along the line, the figures of the GDP came in, and of course, you know, my question will start from that end. What were you expecting? Some say it came as a surprise to them.
Well, I mean, I think people who know me well know that I have no expectations, so I'm never surprised. But I have to say, I think it's a good number. I mean, it's a positive number. I mean, let's put this in perspective. It's easy to be hard on ourselves, on Nigeria, but around the world, this has been the greatest health and economic challenge, really, you know, certainly in our lifetimes for a century. In the UK, the economy shrank in 2020 by almost 10%. The year over year, 2019 to 2020 in Nigeria is about minus 1%. As you said, fourth quarter of 2019 to fourth quarter of 2020, it increased a little bit. So I mean, I think it's just a testament to some positive things that are happening. So, and I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
Now, the growth is largely driven by positive growth recorded in two sectors, the other sectors too, but the key sectors: information and communication sector 15.9%, agriculture 3.42%. How does this come to you?
Right. So this is really very good news. I mean, there's been a big emphasis on ICT. It's something that we've talked about a lot. It enables so many other sectors to flourish, and it's fantastic to see it doing well. It's not a big surprise, of course, because people have been working remotely. But I mean, I really have been impressed by the way so many of our clients have been able to transition to kind of the new way of working, and the ICT GDP number shows that. And in terms of agriculture, I mean, yeah, we'd like to see faster growth, but there's been so much emphasis on it. It's paying dividends. When I talk to people who really know the agricultural space, there are farmers in certain crops around the country that are doing very well. So, I mean, I think that's very good news. And of course, it also shows this rotation away from oil is real. I mean, we had this positive growth in the last quarter over the previous quarter last year, same quarter a year ago, despite the fact, if you look carefully at the numbers, the oil production is way down. It's down about 1.56 million barrels a day. I think it was 2 million barrels a day in the third quarter. So despite that reduction in the oil production, we still got positive growth. So I think it's a lot of good news.
But oil sector plunged by 19.76%. This is very notable year on year in real terms, as against the contraction of 13.89 recorded in quarter 3 of 2020. What would you say is responsible for this?
Right. So this is, you know, people tend to always think about the oil price, but probably as important or more important in our context is the production. As I just said, the production in the fourth quarter was only 1.56 million barrels a day, if I have it right. So a big contraction there. So I mean, it's the fact that we're able to grow the economy in the middle of this very difficult health situation, very difficult global economy, and very difficult oil production. It shows you the resilience of the Nigerian economy, and it shows you why I think people who know it well, including myself, really are kind of optimistic in the medium term that we're going to have a very strong, inclusive, sustainable economy very shortly.
For staying with the oil price, do you see anything this affecting maybe OPEC's decision with regards to what's been happening between almost a war between Saudi Arabia and Russia? Do you see this affecting the oil market in any way with all of these reactions?
Well, I think that they had the skirmish back in April and the oil price plunged. I think they both realize it's sort of a path of mutual destruction to bring the oil price down. But I think there's another dynamic going on in the world which is very important, which is we need to decarbonize. We need to get off of oil. So I actually think that the result of that is possibly going to be sustained high oil prices, because so many of the investors, certainly in the Western world, don't want to put any more money into oil, so that they're not going to be investing and not going to be increasing production to drive price ground. So there may be a path where, as we decarbonize, we actually get pretty good oil prices in Nigeria, but we have to be also ready for the day when no one buys oil in the next few decades. So managing that is a bit tricky. But I can't see, personally, I mean, it's just a guess, I can't predict the future. It's just hard for me to see Saudi and Russia coming together to plunge the oil price back to $20.
Now, essentially, the positive growth in real GDP shows that Nigerian economy has recovered from the pandemic-induced recession. Now, do you see the country capitalizing or consolidating this? What should be done to be able to sustain this to a level where we have that kind of growth? I don't want to say inclusive growth, but at least sustained growth before we now start thinking of inclusive growth.
Right. So I said I'm very, optimistic in the medium term. I mean, I'm not going to dwell on some of the difficult numbers for the country. We all understand that. But I mean, there's some positive things. So we just finished yesterday the Lagos Economic Summit. There's some real positives to take away on that. I mean, to begin with, this is something where the private sector and the public sector come together. The chairman, the co-chairman of the summit, one comes from the private sector, one comes from the public sector, which just shows that level of cooperation, the need for the private sector to work with the public sector is really well understood. His Excellency President Buhari himself stepped in to congratulate Lagos State on this, and there were many ministers and other officials from the federal government participating, which really shows, I think there's a deep understanding that the federal government and the state governments need to work together on that. And Lagos, of course, is taking its own responsibility for this. And we also had, at the closing ceremony, His Excellency Governor Al-Rufai of Kaduna come in and join hands with his counterpart from Lagos State, His Excellency Governor Sanwo-Olu. So you see, that level of support. So that is really encouraging as an example on that. There was a lot of talk about making Lagos a very attractive investment destination. Lots of states are doing work on it. Lots of states are working on their ease of doing business. So, that is one part that we feel very confident about. The second part is we've talked for a long time about unlocking dead assets in the country. Two major sources of dead assets, which is sort of residential, real estate in general, but particularly residential real estate that need to build housing, but also government assets, or state-owned assets, federal government, state-level assets. And we've really seen some movement on that. It was a very exciting announcement to have the CBN come out and announce that they've now got the deal to develop the National Theater into a real hub for creativity. So they're turning it, of course, there'll be a real estate development as part of that. So that is turning a dead asset into something that is live. So those are a couple of things that I think, are very positive and show we're moving in the right direction. I mean, really, it feels very different in the country now in terms of economic management versus 5 years ago. Of course, we still have some challenges around the exchange rate. We have challenges around the debt levels, but there's a lot to be optimistic about.
Indeed, a lot to be optimistic about. Non-oil sector, on the other hand, grew by 1.69%. I'd like us to talk about this in real terms, compared to 2.51 recorded in Q3 of 2020. And also, services sector contributed 54.28%. These two sectors, what is responsible for this positive trend? Andrew, did you get my question?
It's very critical for we all.
Oh, okay. I was talking about the performance of the non-oil sector, standing at about 1.69%.
Yeah, no, understood. But you made the point about the services subcomponent of that, and I think that is really critical for people to understand. I mean, most of the economy around the world, 70% is services. And one of the things, we've had the progress, the AFCFTA, most of the time people tend to think of production of goods, of export of goods. Well, one thing that we really try to register, and that's very strong, Nigeria is in services. So both the services produced internally, so our internal domestic consumption of that, but also we are already exporting services around Africa and around the world. So for example, Nollywood, I mean the Nollywood music, the Nollywood film industry, both very powerful, huge exports, both globally and within Africa. We're exporting financial services around Africa. You've got groups like Access, UBA, InterSwitch as three examples of Nigerian-centered companies that are going out to Africa to deliver financial services. So that's an export of it. And then we have things like ICT or business processing services. So a company like Amal Hassan's Outsource Global, which has 1,000 employees in northern Nigeria, is exporting services. And one of the things we've been saying the last few months is actually Nigeria should really focus on the export. These numbers start to show that. And of course, one reason we've said this is, and of course, you had Dr. MCF talking about his comments a little earlier. There tends to be this focus, as I said, on the manufacturing sector, but we're doing very well in services, and we would really like the country to focus on building on that strength. So it's not a big surprise that the numbers that coming at the GDP that the service are doing very well.
All right, it's also a good time to strengthen our manufacturing sector. I spoke to the DG of MAN yesterday, and I know of the challenges and all that was outlined by him. Now, let's now look at persistent structural and policy issues and regulatory issues across the country. How do you see us making all of this better to actually help, of course, ease of doing business, which is key at this time? We know we face other challenges, insecurity and all of that, but at least for business people to be so confident and be able to come to Nigeria to do business.
Right, so that's a very good question. So, I mean, we've consistently said we need investment in the country, 20 to 28% GDP inclusive growth, sustainable growth of 6 to 8%. We're only getting investment of about 17 to 19%, so only about 2/3 of what we need. So, how do we get more investment? So part of it is the ease of doing business. I think PEVEC has done a very good job. But what we've said is that in some ways the federal government, despite doing a lot of good things, hasn't really confronted some of the structural complexities of the MDA system. So we all know about the Orange Shea report from 2013. His Excellency President Buhari sent it last year that he would implement the Orange Shea report, but we haven't really seen that. So we continue to have too many agents, too many MDAs, too much overlapping jurisdiction. So it's still difficult to work through that. And then simultaneously, we kind of have what we call the three big subsidy or structural issues, one being the foil, which is an ongoing debate. And of course, with oil pricing rising, there's always this pressure to, in a sense, reintroduce the subsidy, and there's been a lot of confusion about are we subsidizing or are we not. The second one being electricity, where it was always meant to have market-determined tariffs, but we haven't quite got there. And of course, the one that the manufacturers talk about so much is the exchange rate. So in the ERGP, there was a commitment that we moved to market-determined exchange rates. There's been progress with the different I&E window, for example, on that, and then one narrowing between the parallel rate and the official rate. But with the economic trouble and the low oil price the last year, that has gone away from us. And so those the overlapping MDA issues and then those three subsidy issues, I'll call them, still present a lot of difficulties, and that's why we're not quite getting to 6 to 8%. But that said, I do think that there's a lot of progress in these issues. They're certainly compared to 5 or 7 years ago, they're discussed a lot more openly. There's a debate certainly at the government level about how to do this. There's been movement towards getting to the right structural things. We all understand it's difficult and there's political issues in all of this, but we are making progress, but we still need to get through those structural issues.
Really not wanting to sound like a broken record, we already identified some challenges, debt issues and all of that. Inflation now stands at 16.47%, and we've seen food inflation rising to above 20%. I'm looking at how inflation will affect both the capital and the money markets in the first half of 2021.
Well, I think it's, the inflation situation is difficult. Everyone recognizes that. And of course, our diagnosis of inflation is inflation is caused because we have a high cost of doing business and some of these structural issues we were just discussing. So, for example, everyone knows the cost of moving the container, getting it out of Apapa and out of Lagos to even to Ogun State is more than the cost of moving the container from China to Lagos port on that. And we've made things kind of more difficult for ourselves. So, I mean, what's our choice? We have to stay focused on continuing to make it easier to do business. Certainly the port needs to be decongested on that. That's the only thing that's going to bring the inflation rate down, is by making it easier to do things so it's less costly to do things on that. But as I said, I think there's a lot of progress. I think a lot of states are working at their level, at the state level, to make business easier to do. We just have some way to go. But I don't want to dwell on these issues. I mean, we all understand inflation. We all understand the deficit. We all understand that we need faster growth. I just want to focus on the fact that we see some very positive signs that we're moving in the right direction. As I said before, the fact that we grew fourth quarter over fourth quarter by 0.11%, which doesn't sound like very much, and of course it's below population. We all understand that. But it is really quite an extraordinary achievement in the face of what's happening globally around the world. I think South Africa will have shrunk 8% year over year when they come out with their final numbers. As I mentioned, the UK shrunk 10%, Europe probably close to the same amount here. And in that same context, and despite the problems with oil, we actually shrunk about 1% in 2020 over 2019. So let's build on the positives, build on why we're doing that. And if we get faster growth, you're going to find inflation comes down automatically. You're going to find the deficit comes down, is more manageable. But in the short term, yeah, we do have a problem, because we now have, I guess, what economists might call financial repression, which is that the interest rates are lower than the inflation rate. So then it's very difficult for people to save, to put their money into treasury bills, government bonds, for example, when they're doing that. So we all have an interest in getting this inflation rate back down to something that's below the interest rate on government paper.
Now, Andrew, this growth that we experience, this marginal growth, many have said is not enough for total recovery, looking at the expected or the much sought out after V-shaped recovery. What kind of recovery do you see, and what do you think government needs to do? Now, let's break it down. Short term, medium term, long term, because we need to stay on this so that we can grow positively. Yes, not up to our population growth at the moment, but at least something that can still sustain us to a level.
Well, no, I want above the population growth. No mistake where we're trying to go. But think about what's just happened here. In year over year, we shrunk 1%. And the UK shrunk 10%. Now, why is that important? Because a lot of times, as I've done my job, people come out and talk about the global economy, the impact on us, the global economy. The truth is that our economic performance, it really depends on us. And this last year has shown it. We grew 9 percentage points faster than the UK economy. Difficult global situation on that. And it just shows we can have that kind of gap. So if the UK is growing at 2%, by the same mathematics, we can grow at 11%. So I don't think we should be aiming to go from this marginal level of growth up to 1%, 2%, which still is below population. We need to get to that 6 to 8, 10%, as the governor of the central bank says, double-digit growth. And we are perfectly capable of doing that. And this performance in the last year shows the resiliency of the economy. It shows that there's every other sector other than oil that's able to go forward. So my counsel to everyone in Nigeria is everyone knows the issues. Let's stay focused on them. I know the Minister of Finance is doing an absolutely fantastic job. The finance bill in our survey was really considered a great step forward, very focused on the right issues. I know many of the other ministers are focused on the right issues. So I don't think we should stay the course. As I said before, we need to stay the course. We've got some issues around the structural things, the Orange MDAs, and we've got those 3 subsidies, but we are making progress. So I don't want a big deviation, but at a fundamental level, we need to be attractive to investors. So that's investors from Nigeria, from the diaspora, and of course from outside those groups, right? But people are working very hard to make Nigeria more attractive, and I actually have a lot of confidence in the next 1 or 2 years we're going to really bear fruit with that. Certainly in Lagos, you can see the efforts of the governor and his entire team in the private sector really to make Lagos an attractive place to invest. And of course it's critical because I mean, people may not realize this, but it's projected that in 2100 that Lagos will be the world's largest city. So if you have children today, those children are going to see Lagos as the world's largest city. So it's critical that we get the investment to make Lagos work well. But it's coming on that. And as I said, I take a lot of positives out of this GDP report.
Let's do this in 1 minute. Would you advise government to allow a free flow of the naira? Maybe that would help stability at the foreign exchange market, because we see that all moves, foreign reserves are just dependent on oil prices, and the future of oil prices we cannot predict.
Well, we have said this, and I guess the basic argument we've said is that I actually perfectly understand the logic that has led us to where we are, which says that we have not as much FX as we would like. So, and the government has it because they're getting it from the oil proceeds. So they're going to allocate it to the purposes that they want to allocate it to, and that has a certain logic. The only problem is that at a bigger level, investors, and this includes Nigerians, I don't just necessarily mean foreign investors, do not just are so confused by the FX regime that they refuse to invest. So I said a little earlier in the show, we have that investment rate of 17 to 19%. We need 26 to 28%. The only way we're going to get up there from all investors, including Nigerians, is if everyone understands how the naira works. So they understand how to get dollars, they understand how to get naira, they understand how the rate's determined, it may be a bit volatile, and they can operate that well. The system that we have today, it makes it impossible to attract investment. So I understand the logic how we got here, but we've consistently said for the last few years, not because we necessarily believe in sort of the power of the markets in all circumstances. But in this case, we do need a free flow for the naira. And of course, the biggest source of FX for most Nigerians is not oil, it's the diaspora. And one of the reasons, I don't have the numbers for it, but I suspect one of the reasons Nigeria has done relatively well is the diaspora, despite being under pressure in the countries where they live and earn money, have actually made sure that they've supported their families back in Nigeria, because they understand how difficult it's been on that. So, of course, the federal government, everyone now really understands the power of the diaspora. We wrote the paper on it in 2019. So, and of course, the central banks come out with policies to try to make it more favorable for the diaspora to remit money to Nigeria on that. But I just think our view has been for about 5 years that a floating exchange rate is just going to be something that's necessary. But we've been moving towards it. It's part of the ERGP. We just need to take the final 1 or 2 steps.
Dr. Andrew Nevin, I must thank you for your time. Partner Chief Economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers, thank you very much for spending your time with us this afternoon. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tolo. It's always a pleasure.